Welcome to the Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. Hello, I'm bela.and.mike.
And I'm Mike Wasserman. Hey, Bela, great to see you. It's been a while. I'm really excited for today's guest. Give us the overview.
Yeah, today we're joined by James Quinn. He is a managing director at JLL, which is a Fortune 500 company. And JLL assists other organizations in developing and implementing their real estate strategies in an ever-changing world. You know, Mike, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a real estate strategy. But if you think about what's been going on in the world with COVID and sort of people's migration to working at home, it really has impacted real estate, particularly large companies, the amount of real estate they own, et cetera. The other thing that's interesting is James also wrote a book called Tech Trends 24/7. And, we had a great conversation about how technology and COVID has sort of impacted the pace of technology development and implementation. So I thought it was really good.
Neat. Well, you know me, I'm passionate about digitalization and I'm passionate about management. So I'm really excited to hear what James has to say. So let's jump right into your interview with James Quinn.
Today we have a very special guest, James P. Quinn. He is an author of a new book called Tech Trends 24/7. And he is also an executive managing director at JLL, which is a Fortune 500 company. So James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Great. So let me ask you my first question. James, when you're at a social event and you get introduced to somebody, and after that introduction, they look at you in the face and they say, "Oh, so nice to meet you, James. What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
Well, that's a great question. I think that in terms of what I do, as you mentioned, I'm an executive managing director of JLL. We're based in New York, but our practice is global, and we help corporations with their traditional real estate portfolios as well as their technology portfolios. In addition, we also help them with sustainability in terms of what their strategy is and how they can reduce their carbon footprint. And then other things in terms of what I do, as you mentioned, I'm an author, and I look at that as a very interesting kind of area as well, new to me, which was always interesting, as well as I'm founder of a charity that leverages technology to help people in need.
Oh, very nice. So that's a nice long answer. So let's talk a little bit about JLL. So tell me in a little bit more detail what you guys do there.
Sure. So we're a Fortune 200 global real estate company that helps clients with their traditional real estate portfolios as well as technology portfolios. And, we have a very strong platform throughout the world. So if you have a office or technology project in Paris, Toronto, Chicago, Santa Clara, California, we have very strong leaders in each market that we work on, trying to do advisory work on their, like I said, traditional real estate, technology real estate, as well as their sustainability goals.
Yeah. So give me an example of specifically what you might do for me. Let's say I'm a multinational corporation, and I have locations in London and Paris and New York City. So help me understand what you would actually do.
Yeah, so we would look at looking at your portfolio of, let's just say, office space, locations throughout the world. We'll come up with a portfolio strategy. We'll look at, coming up with ways in terms of you can drive savings to the portfolio, handling space, space acquisition, space dispositions, as well as on technology. It's really where you put your servers. And we have a whole strategy when it relates to that. And also, as I mentioned before, that we also help firms with their sustainability initiatives. I'll give you an example. We did a project for a client of ours in Manhattan, was close to 200,000 square feet. There's a new local law 97, where firms of office tenants as well as data center and technology tenants have to reduce their carbon footprint. And we help them with a strategy to do that.
Got it. Got it. So I would imagine that with COVID and the ability for people to discover, gee, I can work from home, and as companies recognizing that, some a level of people working distantly or working from home is feasible. How has that changed sort of your job and what you do and how you advise your clients?
That's a great question. I think that when you look at COVID-19, it's been really a great accelerator of technology. So really, in kind of one of the themes of the book are really digital transformation of organizations, and in terms of really. When you think about how it's really turned the world upside down, especially, we take one area as the workplace. Now you're looking at where a lot of people would come in 4 or 5 days a week. Now we're talking about, really hybrid as, a couple days a week, and then really having the technology in your home office. So it worked during COVID. So people gives them a little bit more flexibility, which I think is important too. Firms are using it as a recruitment for the war of talent, because people do like the fact that they can work, have flexibility in their workplace.
Yeah, yeah. And so how has that changed sort of, if I'm a corporate CEO and I'm sort of looking at this big picture now, how should I be thinking about my real estate and my holdings and my portfolio, as you put it? Should I be thinking about it differently now than I did 3 or 4 years ago?
Absolutely. And I think that there was actually an article that came out last month about American Express. It was in the Wall Street Journal. And it was really kind of, I think, a good kind of case study on how corporations and CEOs, to your question, are really looking at this and try to tackle this kind of new era that we're in. And they came up with a plan whereby they could have their workforce, you really could pick 3 areas. You could return to work. So, for example, if you lived in downtown Chicago or Manhattan and you really like coming to work, you have that ability to do it. Then there's really kind of a hybrid bucket where if you wanted to come in a couple of days a week and work from home, that was fine with them. And then they had an option that you could pick purely remote work, whereby, if for whatever reason that you wanted to do that, but, they also were, I think, insightful for it. For example, if you were working in New York City and decided to work remotely, but you wanted to move to, say, Cleveland, Ohio, they would, adjust and look at an adjustment for that cost of living versus kind of something that's in the tri-state of New York area.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. So let me try to get your insight. This podcast is more aimed towards entrepreneurs and people who are starting smaller companies and not CEOs of Fortune 500 companies.
Sure.
So if I'm running a small business, I have a couple dozen employees, how should I be thinking about this?
Yeah, so I think that, and really kind of the journey for me during, the COVID was a very reflective time, whereby that you really have to understand, I don't care, the size of business. It could be, like I said, a Fortune 200 company, or it could be a startup, is that when you really need to analyze and become a student of technology in terms of how it's going to affect your business. And I think that the more and more you can understand, what are certain apps associated with it? How is that changing? What is the available technology? How are people working? What is like a competitive assessment of your competitors? And how are they embracing technology? It has to be at the forefront of your strategy. And for me personally, this is like years ago, I realized how technology real estate was going to be much more proficient in kind of the corporate spend for corporations globally. And I said, well, I need to build some advisory services around that. And as a result, I have a thriving practice in technology advisory as well as traditional real estate advisory too. So I think really kind of understanding what the impact of technology is, becoming a student of areas of digital transformation is really kind of going to separate you from the pack if you really dive in and see how impactful it is and be ahead of the curve.
Yeah. And what are the generational impacts of this? And let me try to put my question in context. I think back to, when I was a kid, and growing up and in college, et cetera, the only way you interacted was personally, or maybe on the telephone, but that was it. The only way you could interact with people was personally. There was no other basic vehicle for interaction. Mm-hmm. And now there's many different vehicles for interaction. And personal interaction, actually being in the same room with somebody, is probably a relatively small, or it's not the majority anymore, a way of interacting. We interact in so many different ways, many of them digitally. So how does that, number one, trend impact things? And number two, how does a corporation deal with the old timers like myself, who in my mind says, well, the only real way to interact is, being in the same room with somebody. The only real way I can negotiate a deal is when I'm in the room, versus folks who understand all these various different modalities and ways of interacting. So how does that sort of work its way out?
Yeah, so I think that what we're seeing, really kind of, coming out of the pandemic is, there's not one specific solution as it relates to your organization. I think that, what we've seen with the financial institutions, they are being more, I think, vocal, the fact that, being at the office, 4 or 5 days a week is really kind of important to their fabric as an organization. And that makes sense in terms of what they're doing. Then you have technology companies whereby, you're in a situation whereby they still are opening up their offices, but they're giving you the opportunity to work from wherever you want. But then again, they want to make sure they're addressing collaboration and interaction of their employees. So some technology companies, for example, and they're kind of on the other side of the spectrum of the financial firms, are saying, you know what, we'll host a, 4 times a year, outing for our workforce. And, one part of the year will be in Costa Rica. The next thing it'll be in Colorado in terms of skiing, and we'll make it really kind of an experience that we can bond that way. So, and then I think you're going to have a combination of, really making sure the workplace is safe and it's something that's interactive where people really are excited to go to work. You've heard the expression FOMO, fear of missing out. I think organizations are really putting a lot of time and effort into that to make sure that they really make a very interactive workplace so that people do want to come in and collaborate and spend time with their coworkers.
Yeah, those are some great points, James. Thank you very much. So let me ask you a little bit of question about you. Take me through sort of how you got to where you are, maybe starting back in your childhood, if you would.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good amount of time. So so I grew up in a town in Haslet, Long Island, where athletics was a very big part of my foundation. So I played youth lacrosse and youth football, and that for me was great because you have the discipline of teamwork and really the camaraderie of being on a team, and the discipline in terms of practicing and really game time. So I played high school and high school football, high school lacrosse. Then I went to University of Massachusetts, where I played lacrosse there, and I also coached lacrosse there as well. And then I've always, my father was a shopping center developer. So just as a kid, I would always go to the grand openings, and I thought real estate was great because you meet a lot of different people and it's very tangible. You can put your arms around it. So I got into real estate right out of college, and it was really by, trying to build a book of business in a very competitive area. And then along the way, I started doing some technology real estate, whereby I realized that, all these switching stations that we were doing all across the country were really kind of the backbone of the internet. And, when I saw that, I was like, this is going to be impactful from there. So that's really kind of where my career took off, and understanding where technology was. And that's why I kind of wrote the book, because I really see how dramatic change and what you can do. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So let's talk about the book a little bit. So tell me sort of what's in the book, who's the target audience, right? Who should read this book?
Yeah, I think that the book is for any technology enthusiast. I think it's for the business world as well. We feel very fortunate that the book got reviewed by CIO Insight, which is a leading thought leader in the area for CIOs, and it got actually as one of the recommended books for CIOs to read globally, which we were very happy with. And I think it really kind of looks at digital transformation and how it affects things like the future of work, sustainability, smart cities, sports, fashion, corporate technology. So I wanted to kind of take a broad brush on how technology was changing so many different facets of our world. And like, for example, we have a chapter on assistive technologies that are helping people in need. And I thought I also started my charity because of that, because it's really making a difference in terms of improving people's lives.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And so if I read the book, let's say I'm going to go back to sort of our main audience, entrepreneurs, smaller businesses. And if I read the book, what are the 2 or 3 main messages you hope that I get from reading the book?
I think the main messages are to see how innovation is really changing a lot of our, the work landscape, in terms of your personal landscape, and really understanding how that is, because I think I'm encouraging everybody to become a student of technology, because the better you can understand what's happening, I think the better your position in all aspects of your life.
Yeah. That's great. As you were saying that, it got me thinking about the whole COVID experience we've all gone through here now for almost 2 years, and how I think in the last 2 years, my wife and I have gone out to eat like maybe 2 or 3 times, but we've done a lot of to-go orders, right? So we'd order food, we'd go pick it up predominantly. And it's amazing how some establishments, some big chains, sometimes even small mom and pops, have embraced technology and have used technology to make that whole ordering and pickup process really painless and in many ways almost enjoyable. And others have not, right? And others, it's like a hodgepodge. It's like, and it's just frustrating when you try to engage with them and you try to place an order and then you try to go pick it up. I just leave there going, I like their food, but man, it's such a pain in the ass to get any that I'm not going to do that anymore. So how do you think about things like that? And how do you think how can a CEO or a company business owner embrace that technology? How do they find the time to do that? Right? I mean, this was a forcing function for many restaurants. It was either do this or go out of business. So, if that's the alternative, it's an easy choice to make. But oftentimes these choices are not that clear, right? It's business is going good, right? My company's doing fine. Why should I embrace this other thing? What type of advice do you give business owners for something like that?
I think the advice is you have to make a huge commitment in terms of really making it a fabric of what you're going to go doing forward. I think it's something whereby either you're going to be ahead of the curve, and if you're going to be behind the curve as it relates to technology, it's negatively going to affect your business. So when we look at that, there was a really good, the CEO of NVIDIA, which is one of the largest chip makers in the world, and a very successful company. He had his annual conference, and he was talking about the ordering process for food, just like as you mentioned, and he said that the technology is going to get so good, and if you're really on the right side of it, it's going to make it a wonderful experience, like similar to your experience. And if you're not, you're going to lose customers as a result of it, because kind of where it's going is that you're going to have artificial intelligent avatars that can speak 10 different languages, take your order, and it's real with facial recognition and everything that you can do. It's even going to get better in terms of your experience. And if you're going to be behind the curve on that and you're not going to take the time to invest, I think, there's a good chance you're going to not do so well as compared to your competitors who are embracing technology and making it a big part of what they're doing going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And, engaging in this digital arena, it is the customer experience, right? That's it. Other than, someone bringing out a bag of food and helping me load it into the car. That's the whole customer experience. And entrepreneurs often spend a lot of time and energy worrying about and training people for the person-to-person customer experience, or the, if it's a call center or you're talking to someone on the phone, that whole customer experience. And we need to devote the same amount of care and quality and thoughtfulness to the digital customer experience as well.
Absolutely. And, another good example is we have a chapter on digital twin, and it really is taking kind of a digital model of a physical model. And BMW is a good example whereby now with all their factories, they are having a digital model of that. And they're really looking at ways they can enhance that with, how do they reduce operating expenses? What technologies can they use to really improve the construction of cars? And it's something whereby, having a digital twin work with your real factories is really going to make a difference long term, because you can really experiment with chip technology and accelerated computing to really take that and then put it into your real world factories. So, we're just scratching the surface on that, and we're going to really see a lot more of that in the, in the upcoming years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, let me ask you, what questions haven't I asked that I should have?
I think that you've been really asking a lot of great questions. I think it's, really looking at, we talked about office of work, we talked about digital technology, artificial intelligence. I think that, the other area that I'm passionate about is how technology is helping with people in need. And maybe if I'll give you just a little snapshot on that. When I was doing research for the book, I was amazed in terms of what kind of technologies there were in terms of for hearing aids, and really looking at a type of technology to help people that are challenged visually. And we started working with a company called Open Bionics, and they have made the first 3D printed bionic arm, and it's called the Hero Arm, and it's really transformed the life of adults and children who have gotten it. I'll give you an example. We helped a great young man in the UK named Colum. He was just born without his right hand, and he had typical prosthetics, and they were okay. But his dad was he moved a lot in his career. And just like with everything, you go in and there's what happened, and so he always would be challenged with that. Once he got the Hero Arm, people were saying, instead of asking him what happened, they were like, "That's the coolest thing that I've ever seen." And his confidence level and really how it's changed his life has been dramatic. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. And obviously, there's a lot of stories of technology in terms of its promise. There's some negative, stories on technology, which some are negative. But this is really something that's tangible, that's really impacting people, that I think more people need to talk about.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to end the podcast, I'll say, with that story. I think that was heartfelt and very, very nice to see that technology has many applications, right, across a broad spectrum of things, whether it be from ordering your food or figuring out how to manage a portfolio, to assistive devices for people who have needs. And I think that's just a great thing that we all need to think about. And we all need to be thoughtful about it and apply it, because after all of these things hopefully help people in one way or another. And there's many different ways of helping people. So that's great.
Yeah, that was really kind of the theme of the purpose of the book. So you hit it right on the head.
Yeah, great. So give us the title of the book again, James.
Sure. It's Tech Trends 24/7 and the Impact of COVID-19.
Got it. And it's available at your bookstore, Amazon?
It's coming out in the first week in December. It's going to be on Kindle, hard copy, as well as we have an audio version as well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So this podcast will come out in December. So by the time people hear this, the book will be available, and that's great.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, sure. You've been a great guest, James. I really appreciate and enjoyed chatting with you. Thanks again for being on the podcast.
Excellent. Okay, take care. Bye.
Bela, this was an interesting conversation. I mean, as you kind of promised, it's a changing world, and even things like real estate that are somewhat kind of typically in my mind somewhat fixed, right, has undergone an incredible transformation. So in a kind of a topsy-turvy world right now that we're looking at right now, it was really interesting to hear how digitalization and how innovation can help us respond. What's your take?
You know, number one that I got from this that I sort of knew but really didn't realize as clear as James helped me realize it, is this notion that oftentimes crises drive innovation and drive acceptance and adoption of that innovation at a much higher pace than that normally happens. Right? If you think about pre-COVID, using things like video conferencing it was okay, but people really didn't use it much. And now it's become a part of life. And the systems have improved, the technology has improved, the ways that people can interact in the various different video conferencing systems that are available has greatly improved. You know, you can now have 100 people on a video conference. And so there's a great example of sort of how, you know, a crisis or a forcing function, if you want to call it that, has led to the more rapid development and adoption of these new technologies. So I thought that was one thing that really came out that I think was cool.
Interesting, Bela. You know, one of the things that I really focus on with my students is as digitalization really is something that sweeps through the world, right? And James said it himself too. It's a global world and it's a digital world. One thing is to think about is this idea of inclusion, is how do we make sure that as many people as possible can share in the benefits of digitalization and of technology in general. You know, we saw this, I think, in the COVID situation in the US and certainly here in Europe when schools went online, that lower income students, you know, even though people have a smartphone and a data plan, lots of people didn't have a stable, reliable internet connection at home that they could count on. They didn't have a good laptop situation because not everything is accessible on your phone, right? He gave some examples of things you could do on your phone, but sometimes you need a laptop. And just having a space to work, right, are things that, that we take for granted. But I think that not everybody has. So I always really challenge my students to kind of think about inclusion to make sure that sometimes the people that need access to digitalized services and digital products are the ones that maybe don't have, it's not all the rich people that need this. Sometimes people who are poor need the access to these services too. And we need to figure out a way to get them that access. That's what I see over here in Germany. Do you see this issue at all where you live?
Yeah, I think about it in a much broader sense. Whenever anything new comes out, there's some group of individuals that whatever that new thing is very accessible to. They have easy access to it, either because they have the means or they're geographically in the right location or whatever the factor is. And then there's another portion of the population that is more challenged to be able to get that particular asset or that particular technology or whatever you're talking about. And so I think trying to figure out how we allocate those across these various different groups is really important, is a really important societal question. And it's something that I don't think as a society we've done a great job with in the past. We just assume that, well, it'll take care of itself. Well, it doesn't. And there's been really great examples, whether it be in the health field with digital health, right? I mean, a lot of doctors' offices didn't want to see you if you had a cough, right? During the COVID thing, they wanted to do remote stuff. And like you said, just my mom can't do remote. She's 95. There's no way she can set up her laptop computer or a phone. She doesn't even have a laptop computer or a cell phone to do something like that. It doesn't work for her. And even if I went there and set it up for her, I know emotionally she would not find that to be fulfilling, because she has 95 years of experience interacting with the doctor in a different way, and now all of a sudden it's like watching TV show. So there's a lot of these broad questions that I think we have not done a good job at, and I think that as technology developers, people who and leaders in the world need to do a better job at addressing that. And I just think, there's lots of great examples of it that where people, and it can have devastating impacts, right? We've talked about in this country now about access to the vaccine, and there's been groups here in the United States that, some groups have better access and other groups have less better access to the vaccine. And then if you expand that to the world, well, there's parts of the world where they haven't even seen the vaccine yet. Right? So, not only do you need to do that at a micro level, you need to figure out how to do these things at a macro level. And I think that's one of the key challenges of being in leadership roles today, whether it be in the public sector or the private sector.
I love it. And the solution is probably working together, right? In the big scheme of things, Right. And that seems to be in short supply right now, is people being able to compromise and work together. But we can be hopeful, right? So yeah, I totally agree. Like, and this is a neat way maybe to wrap it up, Bela, is that we need to be aware and open to the changes that digitalization is bringing and the social changes that COVID has brought. And these are going to be with us for a long time, I think. And there's great things about it and there's bad things about it. And what I like to encourage people to do is to think about it from multiple perspectives and put yourself in other people's shoes. And again, kind of making sure that you're open to the fact that, I need to adopt things that are digital, right? I think it's inevitable, but I also need to help and make sure that my neighbors and my family and my friends can access the things that they need digitally as well. And if we work together, I think we can accomplish that and really maximize. I mean, James himself said there's lots of great things about technology, but there's lots of bad things too. And I think if we can work as a community together, even when that's a global digital community, work together to try to highlight and spread the great things about technology and work to understand and minimize the negative aspects of technology. That's the only path forward. It's a hard thing maybe it's an easy thing to say and a hard thing to do, but the first step is to do what you and I think we're just doing, which is to talk with people who know more about this than we do and learn as much as we can and figure out what those strengths and weaknesses are and how to attack them as a community together.
Yeah. Well said, Mike. Well said.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up. So listeners, thanks again for joining us today. We hope you found this episode with James Quinn interesting and thought-provoking. As always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, you're always invited to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com.
Hey, and please do hit that follow button on your podcast. We appreciate it a lot. And so until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.
Thanks, Bela. Always great to spend some time with you. Looking forward to next time. That's it from over here in Münster, Germany. Auf Wiedersehen.